Welcome, history enthusiasts, to another fascinating journey through time. Before we dive into the extraordinary mind of one of history's most legendary conquerors, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into the psychology of history's most intriguing figures. Today, we're unraveling the complex psyche of Alexander the Great, a man who, by the age of 30, had created one of the largest empires the ancient world had ever seen. But who was the person behind the legend? What drove this young Macedonian prince to conquer most of the known world? Let's step into his sandals and explore the fascinating psychology of a man who truly believed he was destined for godhood. Born in 356 BCE in Pella, the capital of Macedonia, Alexander entered a world where his destiny seemed preordained. His father, Philip II of Macedon, was already transforming Macedonia from a backwater kingdom into a military powerhouse, while his mother Olympias filled young Alexander's head with tales of divine ancestry, claiming he was descended from Achilles himself. Imagine being a child constantly told you're destined for greatness, that the blood of heroes flows through your veins. This wasn't just parental encouragement. This was the foundation of Alexander's entire worldview. From his earliest memories, he wasn't just learning to be a prince, he was being groomed to be a legend. The young Alexander's education under Aristotle, one of history's greatest philosophers, added another layer to his complex psychology. For 3 years, from age 13 to 16, Alexander studied medicine, philosophy, morals, logic, and episodes under Aristotle's tutelage. But this wasn't just academic learning. Aristotle was shaping Alexander's mind to think systematically about conquest, governance, and the nature of civilization itself. The philosopher taught him that Greeks were superior to barbarians, that some people were naturally meant to rule, while others were meant to be ruled. These lessons would echo throughout Alexander's campaigns as he sought not just to conquer, but to spread Hellenistic culture across the known world. What makes Alexander's psychology particularly fascinating is the duality of his nature. On one hand, he possessed an almost superhuman charisma and leadership ability. Soldiers would follow him to the ends of the earth, literally because he led from the front, sharing their dangers and hardships. He memorized the names of his soldiers, visited the wounded personally, and mourned the fallen. Yet this same man could fly into violent rages, murdering close friends in drunken fury, as he did with Cletus the Black, who had once saved his life. This wasn't simple anger management issues. This was the manifestation of a psyche under enormous pressure, trying to reconcile human limitations with divine ambitions. The death of his father when Alexander was just 20 years old thrust him onto the world stage. But instead of being overwhelmed, Alexander seemed to embrace his destiny with frightening determination. Within 2 years, he had secured Macedonia, crushed rebellions in Greece, and set his sights on the Persian Empire. This wasn't youthful recklessness. This was calculated ambition fueled by a deep psychological need to surpass his father's achievements and fulfill what he believed was his divine mission. Every victory reinforced his belief in his own invincibility, creating a feedback loop that pushed him to ever greater risks and rewards. Consider the psychological impact of never losing a battle. From his first major engagement at the Granicus River to the massive confrontations at Issus and Gaugamela, Alexander's tactical genius seemed to confirm his mother's stories about his divine heritage. Each impossible victory against overwhelming odds didn't just boost his confidence, it fundamentally altered his perception of reality. he began visiting oracles, seeking confirmation of his divinity. At the Oracle of Siwa in Egypt, he was supposedly confirmed as the son of Zeus Ammon. Whether he truly believed this or used it as political propaganda, the line between Alexander the man and Alexander the god became increasingly blurred in his own mind. His relationship with his companions reveals another crucial aspect of his psychology. His deep friendship with Hephaestion, whom he considered his Patroclus to his Achilles, shows a man capable of profound emotional connections. When Hephaestion died, Alexander's grief was so extreme that he crucified the physician who failed to save him and spent the modern equivalent of millions on the funeral. This wasn't just mourning. This was the reaction of someone who saw himself as living in an epic poem, where emotions must match the grandeur of the narrative. The further east Alexander traveled, the more his psychology shifted. The Persian customs he adopted, requiring prostration from his subjects, demanding to be treated as a living god. These weren't just political moves. They represented a fundamental transformation in how he saw himself. The boy who had slept with Homer's Iliad under his pillow had become the protagonist of his own epic, unable or unwilling to distinguish between legend and reality. His soldiers, particularly the old Macedonian guard, watched with growing alarm as their Alexander became something alien to them. His decision to push into India, despite his army's exhaustion and homesickness, reveals the ultimate expression of his psychological state. He wasn't just conquering territories. He was chasing the horizon itself, seeking the edge of the world where he believed he would find ultimate validation of his divine nature. When his troops finally refused to go further at the Hyphasis River, it wasn't just a military mutiny. It was reality, forcibly intruding on Alexander's mythological worldview. The psychological blow of this limitation, this first real defeat, not by an enemy but by human limitations, marked the beginning of his decline. The return journey saw an Alexander increasingly erratic, paranoid, and desperate to maintain his legend. The mass marriages at Susa, where he forced his officers to take Persian wives, the execution of perceived traitors, the alcohol-fueled rages, all point to a psyche struggling to maintain its grandiose self-image against mounting evidence of mortality. His death at 32 in Babylon, whether from poison, disease, or accumulated wounds and exhaustion, ended a life that had burned too bright for too long. Understanding Alexander's psychology helps us grasp his monumental impact on history. His empire fragmented immediately after his death, but his true legacy was psychological and cultural. He proved that individuals could reshape the world through force of will, inspiring countless imitators from Caesar to Napoleon. The Hellenistic culture he spread created a common intellectual framework across 3 continents, enabling the later spread of Christianity and Islam. Cities bearing his name dotted the ancient world, each a monument not just to his conquests, but to his psychological need to achieve immortality through legacy. Perhaps most importantly, Alexander represents the ultimate expression of human ambition, unlimited by moral or practical constraints. His psychology, that unique mixture of genuine brilliance, cultivated megalomania, and relentless drive, created a template for the conquistador mindset that would echo through history. He showed that with enough charisma, tactical genius, and utter conviction in one's destiny, an individual could literally change the course of civilization. Whether this is inspiring or terrifying depends on your perspective, but it's undeniably one of history's most powerful psychological case studies. Today, Alexander remains a mirror for our own ambitions and limitations. His story asks us fundamental questions about the nature of greatness, the price of ambition, and the thin line between vision and delusion. Was he a visionary who nearly united the world, or a megalomaniac whose delusions of grandeur cost countless lives? The answer, like Alexander's psychology itself, defies simple categorization. If this exploration of Alexander's mind has fascinated you, please subscribe to our channel for more psychological deep dives into history's most complex figures, and share your thoughts in the comments below about what drives individuals to seek such extremes of power and glory. The transformation of Alexander from Macedonian prince to divine pharaoh reveals perhaps the most fascinating aspect of his psychological evolution. When he entered Egypt in 332 BCE, something profound shifted in his self-perception. The priests at Memphis crowned him not just as a conqueror, but as the legitimate successor to the pharaohs, and more significantly, they declared him the son of Amun-Ra. This wasn't mere political theater for Alexander. It became a cornerstone of his evolving identity. The journey to the oracle at Siwa, deep in the Libyan desert, marked a psychological turning point that would define the remainder of his short but explosive life. Consider the scene. Alexander, barely 24 years old, traversing hundreds of miles of hostile desert with a small entourage driven by an almost manic need for divine confirmation. When the oracle allegedly greeted him as the son of Zeus Ammon, witnesses reported that Alexander emerged transformed, his eyes blazing with an otherworldly conviction. From that moment forward, he began requiring prostration from his subjects, a Persian custom that horrified his Macedonian companions. This wasn't simply adopting local customs for political expediency. Alexander genuinely began to believe in his divine nature. The psychological implications of this divine complex are staggering. Modern psychiatrists might diagnose this as grandiose delusion, but in Alexander's context, it served as a powerful psychological engine. This belief system allowed him to push beyond normal human limitations, to demand the impossible from his troops, and to conceive of conquests that seemed like madness to everyone else. When he stood at the banks of the Hyphasis River in India, weeping because his exhausted army refused to go further, he wasn't just crying over tactical failure. He was experiencing the crushing realization that even a god king has limits when operating through mortal instruments. His relationship with his companions reveals another layer of his complex psychology. The murder of Cletus the Black, one of his oldest friends and the man who had saved his life at the Battle of Granicus, shows Alexander's psychological fragmentation under extreme stress. During a drunken banquet in Samarkand, when Cletus dared to criticize Alexander's increasing Persian affectations and compared him unfavorably to his father Philip, Alexander grabbed a spear and ran him through. The immediate aftermath saw Alexander attempting suicide, locked in his tent for 3 days, refusing food and water, consumed by a grief so profound it threatened his sanity. This incident illuminates the constant psychological warfare within Alexander's mind. He was simultaneously the rational, Aristotelian student, capable of brilliant strategic thinking and philosophical discourse, and the passionate, violent warrior king who could kill his closest friend in a rage. The guilt from Cletus's murder haunted him for the rest of his life, yet it didn't stop him from later ordering the execution of Philotas and Parmenion, or from crucifying 2,000 defenders of Tyre. This cognitive dissonance, the ability to hold contradictory moral positions simultaneously, might have been what allowed him to function as both destroyer and builder, conqueror and liberator. His vision of cultural fusion, what historians call his policy of fusion or synthesis, reveals yet another psychological dimension. Alexander didn't just want to conquer. He wanted to create a new world order where East and West merged into something unprecedented. The mass wedding at Susa, where he and 90 of his officers married Persian noblewomen, wasn't just political strategy. Alexander genuinely seemed to believe he could forge a new hybrid civilization through sheer force of will. He adopted Persian dress, learned local languages, and incorporated foreign troops into his phalanx. This wasn't the behavior of a typical conqueror. It was the vision of someone who saw himself as architect of a new human reality. The psychological toll of maintaining this vision while managing an increasingly hostile Macedonian old guard created enormous internal pressure. His paranoia grew exponentially in his final years. The conspiracy of the pages, where his own royal attendants plotted his assassination, shattered whatever remaining trust he had in those around him. He began seeing threats everywhere, ordering executions on mere suspicion, drinking heavily to quiet the voices of doubt and fear. The man who had once slept soundly before the Battle of Gaugamela, facing Darius's million-man army, now couldn't rest without wine and guards at every entrance. His relationship with Hephaestion provides perhaps our clearest window into Alexander's emotional psychology. Hephaestion was more than a friend or even a lover. He was Alexander's emotional anchor, the one person who knew him before the divinity, before the crown, before the blood. When Hephaestion died in Ecbatana, Alexander's grief was so extreme it bordered on madness. He ordered the execution of Hephaestion's physician, demolished the temple of Asclepius for failing to save his friend, and spent the modern equivalent of millions on the funeral. He declared Hephaestion a divine hero and ordered all of his empire to observe mourning. This wasn't just grief. It was the psychological collapse of someone who had lost their last connection to their humanity. In those final months in Babylon, Alexander's behavior became increasingly erratic. He planned impossible campaigns to Arabia and Carthage, drank constantly, and ignored multiple omens warning of his death. When Babylonian astronomers warned him not to enter the city from the west, he initially heeded them, then changed his mind as if daring fate itself. This wasn't mere superstition being ignored. It was the behavior of someone who had begun to believe their own mythology so completely that they thought themselves beyond mortal consequences. The fever that killed him at 32 might have been poison, disease, or the cumulative effect of wounds, exhaustion, and alcohol. But psychologically, one could argue Alexander had already begun destroying himself long before his body finally surrendered. The death of Alexander marked not an ending, but a transformation that would echo through millennia. His empire, built on the foundation of his extraordinary psychology, immediately began fracturing along the very fault lines his personality had created. The Diadochi, his generals who had witnessed his divine pretensions and superhuman ambitions firsthand, carved up his territories like vultures descending upon a fallen eagle. Yet paradoxically, this fragmentation spread Hellenistic culture far more effectively than a unified empire ever could have. Each successor kingdom became a laboratory for Greek thought, adapting and evolving in ways Alexander himself could never have imagined. The psychological template he had created, that of the divine ruler-conqueror, would be adopted and modified by countless leaders throughout history. The Ptolemies in Egypt literally deified themselves following his example, while the Seleucids in Syria maintained his vision of cultural fusion. Even Rome, that pragmatic empire that would eventually swallow all these kingdoms, found itself seduced by Alexander's psychological model. Julius Caesar wept before Alexander's statue in Spain, lamenting that at the same age he had achieved so little compared to the Macedonian king. What makes Alexander's psychological impact truly remarkable is how it transcended mere military conquest. His belief in the fundamental unity of humanity, born from his complex relationship with Aristotelian philosophy and his mother's mystical teachings, created a new paradigm for how empires could function. Previous conquerors had simply imposed their will upon subject peoples, extracting tribute and maintaining separation. Alexander's psychological makeup demanded something different, a genuine fusion of cultures that reflected his own internal struggle between Greek rationalism and Eastern mysticism. The cities he founded, over 70 of them bearing his name, weren't just military outposts, but psychological experiments in creating a new form of human society. In these Alexandria cities, Greek gymnasiums stood beside Eastern temples, and local gods were given Greek names while Greek deities adopted Eastern attributes. This wasn't mere political expediency, but a reflection of Alexander's deep psychological need to reconcile the contradictions within himself. The influence of Alexander's psychology on military thinking cannot be overstated. His concept of leading from the front, of the commander as warrior hero, became the ideal that every subsequent military leader would be measured against. Napoleon studied his campaigns obsessively, not just for tactical insights, but to understand the psychological dimension of his leadership. The way Alexander motivated his troops through personal example, shared hardship, and the promise of glory created a template that military academies still teach today. His use of propaganda, from commissioning court historians to spreading stories of divine favor, established psychological warfare as an essential component of conquest. The famous incident where he cut the Gordian knot wasn't just a clever solution to a puzzle, but a masterclass in psychological manipulation, transforming a moment of potential embarrassment into a demonstration of decisive action that would be remembered for centuries. Perhaps most fascinating is how Alexander's psychological profile influenced the development of religious thought. His syncretistic approach to divinity, blending Greek, Egyptian, Persian, and Indian religious concepts, created a precedent for the kind of religious fusion that would later characterize the Roman Empire and eventually facilitate the spread of Christianity. The idea of a divine mediator between heaven and earth, which Alexander embodied in his own self-conception, would resonate through Hellenistic mystery religions and eventually influence early Christian theology. The Gospel writers, products of the Hellenized world Alexander created, would describe Jesus entering Jerusalem in terms that consciously echoed Alexander's entries into Babylon and other great cities. The psychological template of the divine king who conquers through suffering and transforms the world through his vision became a powerful archetype in Western consciousness. Alexander's impact on the concept